Hi, this is Travis here at Exercise Lab with another video for you guys. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy for those who don't know me, and I want to talk to you guys today about a product that's a pretty nifty little device called the Flexbar by TheraBand. I had actually talked about this in the early days of this channel, but the audio visual left a bit to be desired. And so I want to go ahead and bring that again to you guys today. Again, I'm not paid by TheraBand. I just think this is a pretty cool device. I've talked to a lot of people about it. I'll say, hey, get one of these things, come back and see me in a few weeks if it doesn't get better. And a lot of times I'll say, hey, I went through that little pamphlet that it comes with, and it actually got better. And so I think it's a pretty cool thing. I use it a lot. I thought it was a good device before this channel. I actually think it's a good device now. So either I'm, hard-headed and stubborn, and that may be the case, or this is actually a pretty cool thing. So just in case it is, I want to go ahead and bring that to you guys today. So if you're interested in learning a little more about it, go ahead and stay tuned, and we'll get started. All right, so as you guys can see, this is a flexible little device. It's got some give to it. This is a blue one, which is one of their stronger ones. They have different colors, and so it goes yellow, red, green, and then blue. So, blue would be for somebody who's obviously got some pretty good strength. And, I've talked about grip strength on this channel. I'll try to link to that video. But if your hands and wrists are on the stronger side, you may need one that's on the stronger side. Part of that's also going to depend on kind of where your symptoms are. So, when in doubt, I typically will tell people to start with a lower one and then kind of build up. And that's easy to do when you're in a therapy office and you have multiple ones of these. Now, if you're just on your own, you're going to only buy one. I wouldn't say get the whole set. You can get sets by other manufacturers, but I find that I just like this one because I know it the best. You could try another one though and see if it does the trick. I know there are other players in the game now that do make these things. But that being said, so if I'm dealing with someone who's more on the athletic side, got a pretty good grip, I would probably tell them to go, maybe green, maybe even blue if they're pretty strong. Somebody who's maybe not, as athletic or just, hands aren't quite as strong. A lot of times I'll actually tell them to start with red. And some of the reason why I'll do that oftentimes is because at least they have some room to grow into it. Whereas if you start with yellow, unless you're really weak, oftentimes you're just going to hit the ceiling pretty fast. So typically I'll actually start people about red. Red to green probably is the more typical ones. And then my really strong people, I'll usually go for something like blue. And so if you think about, again, basic structures. So lateral epicondylitis on the outside of the elbow, that's your typical tennis elbow. Medial epicondylitis, that's more your, golfer's elbow as they call it. And then you've got a lot of passive structures, kind of through this retinaculum here, carpal tunnel being one of them when the median nerve gets pinched. And so, you can get a whole variety of different wrist and elbow symptoms. I would say for anybody who's getting a lot of numbness, tingling, things of that nature in the hand, I probably wouldn't start with this. So when I say, pesky problems, what I'm talking about is you're just kind of getting some localized pain, maybe something that kind of feels uncomfortable, nothing that typically radiates, nothing that's really causing a lot of weakness in your hand. So if things are falling out of your hands and you're noticing your hand just doesn't feel as strong, you definitely want to get that checked out. So people who have nerve damage and things of that nature, I probably wouldn't start with this. Not to say I wouldn't maybe use it, but I want to know what I'm dealing with first. And so again, when in doubt, get checked out. But that being said, if you're just kind of dealing with more of that achy type stuff, you go to swing a racket, you go to exercise a certain way, and there's that pain. So it seems pretty mechanical. That's where I think this thing can kind of shine and where it can maybe help you out. So you want to make sure you're the right candidate for it first. And again, when in doubt, get checked out. What are the basic movements of the hand? So, the main things I can do, I should say more at the wrist forearm than the hand per se, because I'm not going to be doing a lot of flexion extension here. What I'm talking about is more of that, pronation and supination, okay? And then we have what we also call ulnar deviation, which is more moving that pinky down towards my wrist. And then I have more radial deviation, moving the thumb towards the forearm, okay? And so those are the four movements we're going to try to really exploit here. There are a couple of other ones as well. But to start with that, so if I was going to start with, let's just say ulnar deviation, again, taking my pinky down towards here, what I'll often do is I'll stabilize it on something. And again, you could use a folded up towel. And then you can just try to take that pinky down towards your wrist effectively, okay? And so that's how I would do ulnar deviation. And so, I can do a little bit of a deliberate pause here. That's kind of about the tempo I like to go, where I'm just kind of nice and controlled rather than just kind of, banging these out. So I like to kind of get somewhat of a pause where I can really sort of feel that working. Prolonged eccentrics have also been shown to be helpful for tendon type issues. So sometimes actually that slower release can be a nice way to get that tendon if, this is a tendon thing we're thinking perhaps. And so that's ulnar deviation, okay? Radial deviation, all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this thing in now, and then I'm going to try to take my thumb towards my forearm, okay? That's going to be radial. And so again, I'm just trying to change this angle here. It's okay if it's not completely pure, but you want to be pretty much in that ballpark. And I can see, you see how this brachioradialis, which is a muscle here, wants to jump out on me here? That's okay. But this is basically the movement I'm trying to do. Radial and ulnar deviation are more what we call co-contraction. There isn't necessarily a specific muscle that's really devoted to that. It's really actually, you get contraction on both sides of the fence, which is kind of nice. And so that's, again, ulnar, radial. And then from there we have more what we call conventional sort of pronation. That's almost like an arm wrestling type movement. And then supination, which is going to be spinning that palm up toward the ceiling. And so pronation, it almost feels like you're kind of arm wrestling somebody. So you're going to take this thing, and obviously arm wrestling is getting fairly popular these days. So this actually might not be a bad maneuver to try and do if you're trying to get into some arm wrestling, or just trying to work on your strength in that vicinity. And so again, you could do a slower release depending on what your issues are. And so again, I'm just trying to smash this down. Now notice how I'm doing all this single-handed. A lot of times people will do this 2 at a time, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. I just like the isolation here, because what happens if you're not stabilized is people end up doing a lot of work with their shoulder. And so when you're stabilized here on the table, it's just a nice way to really make sure you're dialing in that tension where you want it. You're not cheating at all, because again, the body's sort of the ultimate improviser, and they'll always cheat whenever it gets a chance. So at least when you're in here, it gives you a nice opportunity to hopefully get things ironed out. And then from the other side now, we'll be spinning up toward the ceiling, which is going to be supination. This is a pretty hard one, but I'm basically just trying to spin that palm around toward the ceiling, okay? And this is actually a function partly of the biceps too, so you might even feel your biceps kind of popping out on this one, because bicep, in addition to elbow flexion, does wrist supination. And so that's supination. And again, on the count on these, probably not critical that you go into like super high reps on this stuff. I usually try to go somewhere around 20-ish on the rep count, maybe 20 to 30. So I'm not going so heavy that I can, barely do it, because you do want to get some volume, because you want to get that, repetitive muscle contraction. You want to get that pumping and squeezing effect. And so, I think by the time you hit about 20, you're pretty good. If you want to go a little higher though, go to 30. I think that's fine. Again, you could always build up the volume a little bit too by just doing an extra set. So if you're pretty gassed at 20, if you can do more than 30, it's probably a good indication you're ready for a stronger one. If you're up to blue and doing 30, then I think you're probably pretty good. And I'd say at that point, maybe you're approaching the ceiling of what this thing can do for you. Back in the day, they did make a black one. I haven't seen that one lately though. So those are, again, your basic movements, ulnar, radial deviation, pronation, supination. And now we can talk about more of what I call the motorcycle, where you're going to be kind of winding this thing up. We're really talking about wrist flexion and wrist extension. So flexion, again, is going to be when I'm going down here. Extension is when I'm pulling back, okay? And so when I do this now with this bar, I can stabilize with one hand as I do, kind of that motorcycle. I'm doing wrist flexion now, where I'm trying to go in this direction. Or I can grab it here and I can do extension. Okay, so now I'm actually pulling it back, and this would be more that revving the motorcycle type of movement. One of the things I should mention also, you notice my hands are now off of this table. The reason why is because when you're stabilized, unlike the other movements I was showing a minute ago, you don't have as much wrist flexion and extension available to you when your elbows are flexed, which they kind of have to be if you're on the table. So for these ones, actually, I will let my elbows float, but I'm just trying to, keep myself honest if I can, not let my shoulders be hiking up too much and cheating with them. And I think on this one, it's a little bit easier to dial that in and keep that tension where you want it, without, hopefully getting too much of that temptation to cheat. And say if I'm doing supination, that one just kind of really lends itself to shoulder movement, versus if I'm just doing more wrist, flexion, it's a little bit easier to not cheat and stabilize here. So I'm going to be up in the air on these. And simplest way to do this would be to stabilize with one hand. And let's just say I want to do wrist flexion, so I'm going to pull it down. So I'm going to go ahead and go down now with my right side. Okay, or I could do wrist extension, where now I grab it and pull it back, and that would be more that revving like a motorcycle type of movement. And so that would be the easier place to start, particularly if you're having a hard time. Flexbar you ended up getting. Now, if you're at a point though where that's starting to feel like it's getting a bit easier, I can do this all day, it's not that hard, then you can do simultaneous, you kind of opposite. So I'm going to do wrist extension on one side as I do flexion on the other. And so that's going to look more like this. And as far as the demand now on those wrist flexors, it's going to be significantly higher. And so wrist flexors are primarily going to run into that medial epicondyle. That's where they attach. And so for somebody who has, true golfer's elbow type thing, they're going to often tell you to prioritize your flexors. If it's more the lateral epicondylitis, that tennis elbow, they're going to tell you to work more of the extensors. Now, my argument actually oftentimes is I would say probably still do both. Just because that's where the eye of the storm is. Yes, you do want to devote some attention to those muscles specifically, but there's a lot of co-contraction that happens in our forearms. And so I think it's actually best to still get the, both worlds. And so on an exercise like this, I wouldn't tell somebody that had, golfer's elbow to exclusively do wrist extension, I'd say, hey, go in there and get some flexion some of the time too. So go ahead and, put that thing down. And I think you're actually going to get more benefit by probably just doing that, assuming your tissue can tolerate it. Now, if you're, at a really severe place where maybe this, can't tolerate that much volume yet, then I might, rethink that. I might say, okay, let's initially start with, some prolonged eccentrics. I'm going to show you guys this movement called the Tyler twist in a second, which is sort of the movement that broke the internet with this thing, which is basically just because the study showed really good results with this bar doing this Tyler twist maneuver. I think it's actually better to probably just do, good old-fashioned flexion extension. And again, you can kind of prolong that eccentric with a little more of an unwind. But I'll still show you guys the Tyler twist in a minute just for completeness. All right, so just for, again, the sake of completeness, I'll show you guys this Tyler twist, which is a movement that I think basically got popular because there was a study that was effectively terminated prematurely because apparently the subjects did well enough. They all got better before the trial had ended, and so they just went ahead and killed it. I don't know how often that's been replicated, and I'm not even sure if that was independently funded. That actually might have been, wouldn't be surprising if that was funded by TheraBand. So take that with, a grain of salt. But basically the way the maneuver would work, and again, this would be for lateral epicondylitis. So again, that's that tennis elbow. So let's just say that this is where I'm having some pain. I'm, that tennis guy, and on my serve, I get some pain. You're going to grab it with your hand at the bottom. A simple way to remember this is your thumbs are going to be closer together. So the top hand doesn't come in here. The top hand is going to be facing down. Okay. Then I would wind it up. So I basically go into wrist flexion on that top hand. I then straighten my arms, and then I'm going to release it now with the hand that I started with. Okay, so by that releasing, so I basically preloaded tension on this thing, and then I release it to get that lengthening, which is again that eccentric. And so again, just to show you guys how that would work, I grab it here, other hand comes in, so my thumbs are effectively, facing each other. I wind it up with my top hand, then I just bring my arms in front of me. So this part, I'm not doing anything other than just moving my shoulders. I'm not actually changing the tension. So step one, tension on it, keep it the same, and now release it with the other hand. And again, I would probably go a little slower. So, kind of a slow release to get that eccentric. Come back, tighten it up, straighten it out, release. And that's that Tyler twist. And again, that's a maneuver that seemed to help people with lateral epicondylitis, which is where those wrist extensors attach, and try it out. But you can certainly also get at it with a less, mental gymnastics type of way. So, if that seemed like that was a little bit much for you, it is a little bit like rubbing your head and patting your stomach, then all you have to do is just grab it in front, and then you can just do active wrist extension, because again, that's what those muscles do. So I'm going to do concentric wrist extension, and then just do a slow release, okay? And so again, I could do opposites if I want. So I could do active, with flexion on my other side, and then just a nice slow release. And so again, okay. And in my opinion, I think the amount of eccentric benefit you're going to get from there is going to be pretty similar. So pick your poison on that one. But again, that's the Tyler twist, and that would be how to do a prolonged eccentric for, again, lateral epicondylitis. Just for, those of you who have more of that medial side pain, that's going to be active wrist flexion. So in that case, now I'm going to want to flex my wrist, which again is going to be here. And then I would just do a slow release on that one. So I'm going to flex down and then a slow release, okay? And so that would be the way to get kind of that same effect to that Tyler twist for the medial epicondyle. And so again, that's there for you. All right, so that's the video today on the TheraBand Flexbar. One thing I'll leave you guys with is, should you be doing this if you don't have any wrist and elbow problems? Say you're a hockey player, who does a lot of slap shots, and you want to know if you can get in front of it by working on this thing. I would say maybe. I think that there may be some room for prevention on this thing as well. So, anybody who's going to be getting a lot of forceful, repetitive loading, through the elbow structures, I think might be able to benefit by trying to get in front of it with some of this. Because, again, it's hard to be too strong, but there's certainly a lot of problems you can run into when you're too weak, right? And although these muscles are going to be utilized in other things, you're not going to use them as directly, right? And so many people who just do conventional weight training, the first time they grab this thing, they're going to probably be like, oh, well, that's actually harder than I expected it to be, just because that's not an exercise you typically do. So, again, we're always talking about, grip strength and longevity, and I spoke to that in my last video. So I'll also link to that. But, could this be something to strengthen your grip in addition to the dead hangs I talked about? Certainly. And, because when you are holding this thing in these various positions, that certainly does require some grip strength. And how much is this thing by itself going to increase your dynamometer strength, as I talked about in the last video? That's going to be hard to say, but if you can build up to blue, say if you're only starting out at red, that obviously is going to demonstrate that you have probably increased your strength in a few different ways. There is a unique handhold you can do from our finger strengthening, which I didn't show, but you can basically try to spin this with your fingers. So if you were doing this more in a grip strengthening type fashion, you could also maybe work on some finger strength while you're at it. Why not? And there's another thing they show where you sort of work on your thumb. And so I basically just try to take my thumb and push into this. This is where I think, because that's going to be more limited, I can try to move my thumb, this way and that way. So in this case, I'm trying to move my thumb like this. And in this case, I'm trying to move my thumb, more like that. That's a pretty hard thing to do, this blue one, as you can see. So you might want to build that up a little more. But, strengthening, again, all those fingers and that thumb, I don't think it's a bad way to go. Because this thing is fairly inexpensive and very easily portable, if you had it laying around whenever you have a dull moment, you got a couple minutes to spare, go ahead and just work on a little, wrist and elbow strengthening. Why not? And there's no reason why you have to set aside, a lot of special time for this. You certainly don't have to buddy it up with a workout. You can certainly do this on its own and just try to get your hands a little stronger. And as I talked about in the grip strengthening video, it may be able to pay some dividends for you. So again, I'm not sure how much this is going to carry over directly to that dynamometer strength, but I think it probably would give you something. So it's there for you. Again, that's the TheraBand FlexBar. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Definitely subscribe if you like this stuff. Comment below. Again, let me know what you guys think, and more good stuff in the pipeline. And as always, I hope you guys have some fun.